Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Sarah Hughes. I'm the Senior Vice President of Customer Experience and Channel Marketing here at Kandy Communications. And welcome to the next installment of the Kandy Technical Fireside Chat. Today's topic is best practices in deploying SIP phones with the Kandy Business Solutions. And with me today, I have Jason Whitaker, who is our IoT expert for devices. Also have Dave Fowler, longtime subject matter expert, support and operations, and Sharon Posadny from our customer success team. So thank you for joining today. Just a little bit of logistics, the mics are muted down. If you have questions as we go along, please ask them in the chat, and Sharon will be our moderator to help us get answers to those. So again, we're going to go ahead and kick off and get started here. We have a full hour of stuff to talk about. So these are the topics that we're going to cover, specifically about certified devices, supported devices. What is the difference between that? We're going to talk about the different ways to deploy devices. And by devices, we're talking SIP phones with KBS. And again, Kandy Business Solutions. We're going to talk about ZTP, if you've ever heard that. That's zero touch provisioning. And then we're going to talk about how to provision those devices in our admin portal. We'll talk about assigning devices to users because sometimes that can be confusing. We'll talk about default logins and how to factory reset different phones that we have. And we'll talk about provisioning those devices in our Kandy admin around the device keys and the buttons. We'll also talk about utilizing phone templates. If you've not used that, that's a handy tool. We'll also go into device parameters and groups within the Kandy admin. We'll also talk about some common use cases for using those. In addition, we'll go over best practices and gotchas, capturing traces and troubleshooting, as well as do you or do you not, and how to enable an end user to be able to go in and control their own phone within the end user portal. And then finally, we'll wrap it up with a bow, talking about documentation and tools that can help you and your customers deploy these devices on the Kandy UC platform. So we're going to start off talking about what is the difference, and I'm going to hand it to Jason Whitaker. He is our subject matter expert, our IoT expert here, and you can see behind him, he's got walls and walls of phones, and he is the guy that all of our vendors work with to get those phones either certified or supported. So Jason, what's the difference?
Hello, everyone. I'm Jason Whitaker, and as Sarah said, I manage the interoperability testing and SV here at Kandy Communications. The difference really boils down to our interactions with the vendors and their products and our ongoing testing efforts. As you'll see in the slide, the supported devices, typically those happen with a one-time configuration and a one-time whatever particular firmware version at that time. And we ran through our series of interoperability tests and we document it and we publish those. And those devices are supported by KTS. But then we do nothing else with it. It just kind of sets and time passes. We have that documented in our supported devices. And then certified devices, we continually work throughout the year with the vendor to do interoperability testing and then our own regression testing release after release. These devices are also configurable via the portal. You'll see them listed in there as certain models and certain firmware selections, and we support ZTP with these. So that's roughly the difference, and it's a big difference. If you're really concerned about working smoothly with Kandy, then you definitely want to look at a certified device.
Thank you. And we do document every single quarter a list of our supported versus our certified devices. And within that documentation, it also lists the specific firmware. Is that right, Jason, that we test with?
Yes, that's absolutely correct. The firmwares are updated with every release, and the release notes is where we'll publish what new firmwares we've added for a particular vendor or model of phones.
And what functionality works on them. So if you are
Correct.
in the position of looking at what vendors to utilize in your portfolio as you launch this service, we highly recommend that you lean towards those that are certified, because those are going to be tested within our system verification testing, and our technical support will be able to help you through those. It has a tighter integration. Would you not say that too, Jason? The certified ones?
Absolutely.
Okay, good. So that's the big difference. And yes, you can, deploy a supported device, but it's not tested in each and every release that we have. Maybe that was just a one-time deal with a certain um, load. All right, so let's now go to the next topic here about different ways to deploy devices. And Jason, as somebody who is testing and then getting things prepared to, support and all of that, obviously you use all four of these different methods, but
Correct.
as a partner or someone who is deploying these devices, um, I think it's also important for them to kind of test them on their side too, and they would probably start, with these different four methods, and then as they launch to the far right, where the level of effort for them to manage, they don't have to have teams and teams of people to manage. So, if you will, let's go through these and help people understand the
Sure.
differences.
And this is another good example of why you would want to lean towards a certified device in your deployment. As you see, it starts all the way on the right with very little effort because all the work's been done beforehand to get you to that point where, if you can have a phone taken right out of the box, if you set it up within the portal with a subscriber, and we'll get into that later, you can plug it in, boots right up, and comes up with the configuration. The labs and testing manual configuration. This one, of course, is one I do a lot because I'm dealing with the devices before they've ever been integrated into Kandy. It's laborious. It can be, I can assure you. I spend a lot of effort sometimes working on this. So if it's onesie twosies lab testing you're doing, great method, obviously. But for full scale deployments, I would stay away from it unless you've got a lot of time on your hands. Small deployments, you can manage the configurations yourself if they're not supported within a Kandy portal. Most all devices have some methodology for provisioning, for remote provisioning servers that can be handled via DHCP scopes and such to point to those. Scalability is limited on this. So again, if it's a small deployment, maybe it fits your needs, but there's a lot of effort into it. The non-certified devices, this is, we'll talk about this later on too, is generic device provisioning. Actually, I think we're going to have another whole webinar that's going to include that in the
In
future.
December. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in December, thank you. But this is one where we allow the provisioning, basically you're using Kandy as the provisioning server. So you've done the work to figure out what provisioning items are needed, what parameters, and then you upload that into the Kandy portal, and it gets sent down to the phone, provided it can request it correctly. And then there's the certified that we already kind of talked about. Firmwares are maintained on Kandy, zero-touch provisioning, device key management's available, device parameters, and so on.
And when we do the zero touch provision, which we'll go through that in just a minute, we do some security things, right? We lock people out of that web
Yes,
interface so that it's fraud protected and all of that, so people can't get in there and circumvent things. So there's some protections there. So there's a time and a place for each of these, but again, in your scalability and your launches, we highly recommend the far right one to use our zero touch provisioning. So let's talk about what that is. So for those devices that we consider certified, those that we test each and every time, we've tried to take an example from Staples, the easy button, to make it easier for you as a partner, as an enterprise deploying these services, that Polycom, which is now called Poly, audio code, Cisco, and Yealink. We've added this to these 4 different vendor types so that when you plug a phone in, okay, first of all, we want you to go in, this is kind of an animated thing here, is that take the MAC address. There is a number on the back of the phone. It's numbers and letters mixed together, and it defines, the first part of it defines what the vendor is, and the last part is unique. So every device has a unique MAC address, and then you input that into Kandy's provisioning portal. And so then you can go in and add additional parameters. You can assign it to users and all that. But first of all, you need to input it into our Kandy portal. Then the second thing is that our Kandy portal will then go up to that vendor and will say in their server configuration and say, hey, when you get a connection to this, when they try to register, they try to connect and they talk to you, then point it to Kandy so that we can then provision the rest of it. And then the next thing is you need to go plug the phone in. If it's a brand new phone, plug it in, power it on, it gets an IP address and all of that. And it does what I call ET phone home. That phone actually goes back to the vendor that made it, first of all, and sees if there is something in there that points to some provisioning server, and it will point to Kandy. And so the phone will connect to the provisioning server, and then it will recognize that that needs to go to Kandy, and then will go to the enterprise that you've provisioned it under. So that's what happens. And then we will then, from Kandy, push that configuration file and the firmware, by the way, and the configuration file, we're going to talk about that in more details in just a little bit, but it's going to push both of those to make sure that it registers, it comes up, and it has the different features and functionality that you designed for it to have. But what you're going to see when you provision it is something that says waiting to add. And then finally, when it says ready, that's when you can go and continue that provisioning, assigning it to a user, and we're going to go through that. But it does need to have public internet in order to go get that. So if you're closed off and don't let it go up to Polycom or Yealink or Audio Codes or Cisco for that matter, then it's not going to be able to come over to us as well. So that is important that it's there. So that's how zero-touch provisioning works. And I would highly recommend, as you're ordering these devices from the manufacturer, let's say Ingram Micro, 888 VoIP, whoever you order from, Jenny, whoever, that you work with them to get the MAC addresses. As soon as they pull them off the shelf and they scan them with their little scanner, you can get those and you can go ahead and update those into Kandy administration. You can get that and you can utilize our import tools. And I'm going to show you how to do that. Within the admin, if you go into, and again, this is Kandy administration, you go into fulfillment. We've changed administration to be fulfillment, devices, and device management. There is a little question mark on every single page. That's your context sensitive help, and it's a toggle. You turn it on or off. But if you hit that question mark, you're going to be able to download the import file, and it's a CSV file, has 2 tabs in it. The first tab is this one that tells you all the fields in this, and what's mandatory is in yellow, and what is normal devices there, and then green ones, whatever. But you're going to be focused on just the yellow and the terminal type. Now, you could put location and domain name and firmware and enable or disable hot desking if you want to, but just remember that you'll then go, once you download that file, you take the spreadsheet or CSV file that the VAR gives you, the distributor for the phones, upload them into this and format this. You can hit add from file and you can import that file in. You can select it on your computer and then you hit upload, and then it will upload every one of those devices. So you can do one device, you can do 1,500 of them, but you can do them all at once and get them in the system ready to assign. So that's super, super important to do, because if you're hand typing these in, there's a very real chance of fat fingering it or typing it in incorrectly. So once you have those MAC addresses in and it's sitting at ready instead of waiting to add, then as long as you have one MAC address, one device that is not assigned to anybody, when you go into subscribers, then you'll be able to see this field, okay? And it's down at the bottom left quadrant as you provision subscribers. This devices only appears if you've got at least one MAC address that's not assigned, one phone, let's say, that's not assigned to a subscriber. And then if you click this, click to assign, it'll pop up this window and it will provide a list of all of them. You can type in here if you know a portion of it, and you would just check the box to add that one to them. Now, there is something that some people call stacking max, where if you want the same user to have, and this is really doing the primary line for the user, if you want that to appear on multiple phones, you can do that. That's called stacking max. And you then need to hit accept device to get out of this window and go back to the original one, and then save the user. If this phone has been used under a different user, if it's been used under a different service, a couple of notes on that. If it's been used by a totally different service, a totally different platform than Kandy, then you want to make sure that you deprovision it over there, including any zero-touch provisioning. Because if it's a Polycom phone, let's say, and that provisioning server thinks you're going to a competing product or a different product, you need to make sure it's out of that, first of all. And then you would need to factory reset that phone, factory default that phone. If it's a brand new phone, you don't need to do that. You need to power it on as a brand new phone. It'll do the zero touch provisioning and over to Kandy and then connect here. So that's really important. A lot of people tend to forget about the factory default, especially if it's been assigned to something else. So let's talk about factory defaulting. Out of the 4 different ones that we do zero touch provisioning for, there is a default admin password for if you are using the IP, you know, the GUI, if you will, from a browser, and you're on the same network. You also have that same password to enter in on the telephone to go into the advanced settings. Now, if you don't have the password and you have no idea what it is, then there are ways that you can factory reset that phone without having that. And so there's a bit of a, Polycom is a little more complex to do it. You have to understand what the MAC address is and kind of translate that into numbers and all. Cisco as well, and audio codes, different keys you can press in sequence. With the password, knowing that, you can also do that through the telephone itself, and you do have to be there. Now, if you're using Polycom device management software, I believe you can factory default that remote if it's already under that control, but I don't believe Yealink or others have that ability. So you really have to be in front of the phone to factory default it. And the web address is the IP address of the phone. Now, how do you get that? Go through the phone and you can get the IP address. As long as you're on the same network, you can do that. And as long as it's not already sent to zero touch provisioning. So this will be provided in the follow-up so that you can have it as well. It's a great resource. So once you have assigned the device to the user in subscriber and hit save, then you're going to be able to see a new action button on the right-hand side of your screen, and that's called modify device keys. And so this is where you can actually go in and you can assign the different buttons. By assigning it to the user, the first thing that you did, and even stacking the max, is to put the primary line is this user, okay? And then you can click an individual key there, and then it will pop up with a set of things that as an administrator you can assign, like a line appearance, busy lamp field with call pickup, busy lamp field with speed dial, call park directed, that kind of thing. And we're going to be adding some more buttons in here and kind of changing some of the names so they line up a little bit easier. Jason and Sharon and I and the team and documentation have been working on that to add some additional things in here for you over time. But once you're done with this, then what this is doing is changing that config file under the hood. And so in order to make your phone take this, once you save, make it take effect, you do need to hit check sync. And again, what that's going to do is push this configuration file to the phone. It'll do a quick software reboot. It won't have to run through the entire reboot, and it will make it take effect. Now, do keep in mind at the end of this year, we're going to also have this for audio codes. We do have this today for Polycom, Yealink, and Cisco, but we're working on the Cisco ones now, but the end of the year, the audio codes will have the buttons as well. Now, why do we talk about buttons versus the device parameters, which we're going to talk about in a minute? Is that the buttons are available for enterprise administrators who you've given the IT operations privileges, okay? So then when you go in and provision a particular phone, buttons, that kind of stuff too, you have something else on the right-hand side. In fact, if I go back here, on this, you'll see as I'm modifying the buttons here, you see something called Save Template, Manage Template, okay? So these are your cookie cutters. So once you get one exactly the way you want it, if you've got 10 phones, 100 phones that are gonna be the same over and over again, you don't wanna have to manually do that. So what you can do is click on Template, save the template, and then you can apply this template, and it will show you all the ones that you have. You can check the box on the left and you can hit apply. So it will basically make it cookie cutter for you in that instance. So you will want to hit save and check sync to make it take effect once you do that. All right, so now we're going to talk about, I'm going to hand it back over to Jason, and he's going to talk about device configuration files and groups. And remember that each phone has a configuration file to tell it what to do. And that's what he's going to talk about next.
Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, device parameters is a higher, I'd like to think of it as a higher level of device keys. It's primarily for the administrators to use, and it can be applied to multiple groups. You can apply it by site, device, Mac, or user view. So you can get very granular with it, and you can also use it for bulk provisioning, and we're going to show you some examples. The groups do overlap in a hierarchical structure of partner down to customer level and down to site. And so we'll start with the partner level, which is something you might want to do, globally. Say you want an NTP source set within your partner, or maybe you want to turn on global address book or personal address book globally. You can do that there, and then you can also lock them so that they can't be overwritten by a subsequent priority rule.
And network time protocol is basically setting the time on the phone, a synchronization of that, correct? That's fine.
Yes, thank you. So this is showing the scope of the group device configurations, partners, customers, device, Mac, and user levels that we discussed earlier, that it's hierarchical, top down, with the lowest being, so think of it as the closer to the device or the closer to the subscriber, that's the most specific rule, and so that one takes precedence. You can have multiple parameters, and the rules can be templated once they're developed so that you can apply them easily. And do remember, a single parameter rule can affect all devices or a single device. Depends on how you want to apply it. I think we're good on that one.
Also with that, you can lock a parameter, like at a partner level, that will, even if a subscriber puts a parameter in, if it's locked, it will not take effect from below the locked level.
It's a very good
correct.
point.
Good point, Dave. Thank you. So this we're showing a partner level, And the example here I believe we're using is global address book, personal address book. This is something you might want to deploy at the partner level for any customer or organization under that. You have two scopes available to you, customer and device types. So since this is specific to a device, in this case, you'd probably do, this is Polycom we're showing an example of. You would select device types, all Polycoms. And that would affect, any child customer Polycoms under that partner once it's applied.
I just moved
Did
you
it
to the
change?
next one. I did, yeah. I just changed you to the next one.
There it goes.
Yeah.
I think mine's slow sometimes.
That's okay.
Once you've created the group, you then want to apply the parameters to that particular group. And here you can see some of the parameters for Polycom, PAB, and GAB. There's the group, which you created. Basically, it's a naming convention. And the action, which is usually always set, and the parameter and the value. Here, we're also showing you an example of adding it from a file. And I think, Sarah, right, we've got multiple different ones we've created as examples that we're going to deploy to the partner portal so that you guys can download them. Yeah, it's a CVS or XML based file. Looks very similar in formatting to the one Sarah showed you previously for bulk upload, but you can do these and then it's just a simple add from file, choose it and set it, and it puts all the parameters up that's needed for that. The main thing you have to remember is that within the file, the group name you mentioned has to be created and match.
Exactly.
And then here we're showing, if you get down to the customer level, there, same principles apply for the groups and the parameters, but the scoping is a little bit more finite as we discussed. So here, now I can pick a site and I can pick it by device, user view, or Mac view. User view is going to show me the individual subscribers. Say I wanted Jason to have this set of features and not Sarah, or Mac, and I can get down to the very device itself. That's all on that one if there's nothing.
Yeah.
And then here's an example of the particular rules. This is a great way, once you've built out your device parameters, I don't know how many use this now, but you can go to query device and there's a selection of by rules or profile. If you query by profile, that shows you all the configuration the portal is going to send down to that particular MAC address, that device. But if you query by rules, this will show you any rules that are built specific and applied to that device. And here we see, as the example earlier, where we built the Polycom, GAB, and PAB, that these rules, those rules do apply for that device. So it's a good test after you've done your configuration to say, hey, is this gonna, is this sending what I think it's sending to the phone? I use it quite a lot, actually.
I do too, for sure. Very helpful. So here's a list of some common use cases for doing it via device parameters versus going over and doing it via buttons. So we were just talking about the global address.
And sometimes the particular item isn't available in buttons, so
exactly,
you need to do it here.
One example of that, and we're working on pulling that in, we've been talking about GAB and PAB. That's the global address book and the personal address book, and that's integrating it into the phone. Each phone has something they call directory or something like that. And so integrating into that, making the phone a little more usable to be able to look up coworkers and other numbers. Another example is that single button call park and pickup. It's something that we started with Yealink. We're working with others to do and trying to include that in buttons in the future. But today, the way to do it is to do it through device parameters. Jason, talk a little bit about what TLS and SRTP is and why someone would want to do that, if you don't mind.
TLS and TLS, SRTP are basically securing both your voice or your signaling traffic with TLS, and then the SRTP is for your media or your voice itself. If you're running, say, over the open internet, or you're a very security conscious company, this is something you might want to look at doing. That way, no one can play a man in the middle or capture your messaging and view what's going on, or hear you if it's just open media, RTP
Exactly.
captured.
Now, we also have RTCP XR, and we did a session a few months back on voice quality. And one of the ways is that these phones can send us that quality of service metrics for that particular call. And we keep that and log that in our analytics and all, but that phone has to be configured to send that to us. And so the best way to do that is through device parameters. Another is multicast paging, and that's, most of you know about broadcast paging through the telephones, and the phones can be configured to do that, but they have to be basically in the same location kind of deal. They can't cross multiple firewalls, I believe. Another is setting up some of these busy lamp field parameters that are a little more than what device keys can do. If you want to set a direct transfer, which is like a blind transfer versus overriding, maybe if a supervised transfer is the default, you can do that here. You can also set up a transfer to voicemail button, some shared voicemail parameters. If you need to have multiple line appearances, so my phone has my primary line, but maybe I need a line appearance of Sharon or Jason or Phil or whoever else on my phone, our admin interface doesn't have that ability to do that. So we have to do that through device parameters. And then speed dials. Yes, you can individually set speed dials, but if you want to set them across multiple devices simultaneously, then device parameters is probably the best way to do it. So, but again, the IT operations privileges of enterprise admin doesn't give them the ability to do this. So these are some great use cases, and I'm going to show you at the end here some of the things that we've done in the partner portal under support for you. So now we're going to talk about a few gotchas and best practices here. What we've seen is, if you are going into the GUI interface for the phone, and then you turn around and do device parameters, you're overriding each other. And it's going to make changes to the same configuration file. So that's definitely a no-no. If you're going to do it one way, stick with it same way. Don't have different teams even. Maybe you're going into device parameters, but then you have a support team or an implementation team that's opening up the GUI and making changes. You're riding on top of each other. And so you want to stick with one plan and go with it. And again, we believe that device parameters is an easier way for everybody to manage that configuration file if you can't do it through buttons or straight up admin. One of the things that gets me all the time, and I forget about it, but it's a gotcha for me. But if you go provision a subscriber, you assign a phone, you want to get it to connect, and it's like, I can't get the phone to come up. And you realize that the password is set that it's supposed to change upon initial login. And so you've got to drill down into the end user web portal and change that person's password, and then your phone comes up. It gets me all the time, and it's a common occurrence. So if it is set to change the password on initial setup, then you will need to do that if you're staging phones. This is something that happens if you're doing, Jason went through the device parameters and groups based upon MAC address, okay? If you have, let's say, single button call park and pickup, set by MAC address for a team of people, but then you go in and you change their phone from one phone to another phone, and you do that through admin, subscribers, device, click and choose a different one. If you fail to come back to device parameters and take that MAC out and put the new MAC in, their busy lamp keys or the park single button call park and retrieve keys are going to be set incorrectly, and they're not going to come up right. So when you do that by Mac, you're going to have to kind of double provision. So you'll provision the user over here, change the device out, but then you'll have to go, especially if you're running by Mac, and change that to remove the old Mac, put the new Mac in. One thing that people tend to forget as we are in a rush, anxieties are high as you're deploying, you're at cutover, whatever, don't forget to look at the phone. It's a no-brainer, but look at the phone. Some of the phones will have, a red button if it's not registered, will have, an LED, will have an X on it if it's an LED. A couple other things that, if do not disturb is enabled for the phone, just in deploying it, somebody accidentally pushed DND on the phone. Most of the phones will show do not disturb, or will have a DND icon or something next to the phone. So the phone display will tell you a lot of information. Even some of them, like the audio codes phone, will even show you an arrow if that phone is forwarded. Again, as people are placing phones, they're playing with phones, they don't back out some of the things that they're playing with, but just take a look at the phone. It'll tell you immediately if it's registered or not, and some of the other features. Now I'm going to hand it over to Dave Fowler, our expert on deploying phones. He's deployed them obviously for our corporations, but also many, many years working with this. And these are some kind of tips and tricks on troubleshooting as well as capturing traces. So Dave, take it away.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. To start with, I want to talk about device passwords to clear up any misconceptions about it, because I think the title might be confusing. So our call server provides a way of decoupling a user's password from hard clients. Some of the reasons you might want to do this, so what that means is we can essentially assign a different password to specific phone types that from a subscriber password. And the subscriber password would be what they log into a soft client with, like the Smart Office client or the end user portal. One of the reasons you might want to do this is with a subscriber password, if they change their subscriber password and you're using that password on a phone, you must also go and update the phone, the hard client, or the phone will not register correctly because the password has changed. When you're deploying, like we have our password policy set up by default that requires an end user to reset their password. And Sarah talked about this a little earlier, prior to it being used. Well, if you're using the subscriber password on a hard client and it requires the user to reset the password, you can't pre-provision a phone with the subscriber password because the subscriber has to change their password. You have to know what that is after it's been changed in order to put it on the phone. So we have the ability to assign a what we call a provider managed client, a PMC password, a password that is specific to devices that is completely separate from the user password. And again, one of the advantages of that is if we assign a device password to a phone and a user changes their password, it has zero impact on the phone itself because the phone password is completely different. Now, the way our call server does this is it matches the SIP user agent and the register header with a SIP profile that we create on the system, and we go in, or the portal goes in, and it sets these SIP profiles for the specific device types that are registering as a PMC device type. And again, PMC just stands for Provider Managed Client. So we have a list on our call server per domain of device types based on the user agent header that can use a device password. So there's an algorithm associated with this that I just briefly want to talk about. And what that algorithm is if a user has not been assigned a device password, so in the portal when you create the user, if you have it set to none, the password used on any device is a subscriber password. So if you don't assign a device password to a user, their user password is used on all devices, regardless if we've specified that as a PMC device type or not. If a user has been assigned a device password in the portal, either set to a specific one to the user or the site password, then any device that is specified as a PMC device on our call server must use the device password. So if they don't have a device password, it's always a subscriber password. If they do have one, then any device specified as a PMC device must use that device password. The subscriber password will not work. Now our portal is set up under, if you went under fulfillment, devices, type settings, you can see there's Polycom, Yealink, Cisco, and audio codes. And when we create a domain, we usually set those to enabled, which means the portal on the back end goes into the call server and defines those device types and all the iterations of them as a PMC device type. We do have the ability for non-certified ones for devices other than those 4 types. Let's say you have a Grand Stream or some other device that you're using that we say will work with the system. We can go into our provisioning system and define those in your domains as PMC devices. Just requires you opening a ticket with support saying, can you make Grand Stream a PMC, or make Grand Stream so that it will use a device password. And then our support team would go in and set those up in the domain so that it would then use a device password. So if you have any questions about what I just talked about with regards to device passwords, put them in the question section and I'll answer as soon as I'm done talking about that. But it's important to know, and it's important to understand how that works, because it's a really great feature that allows you to do a lot of things, such as pre-provisioning devices before deploying them out to a subscriber. And since it decouples it from the subscriber password, you don't have the issue of all of a sudden a phone stops working, because if you're using a subscriber password and the subscriber goes into the end user portal and says, oh, let me change my password, their phone has to be updated with that new password or it will not register. And that happens all the time. So the other one that Sarah talked about earlier, again, is the resetting the initial password, which is on by default for most domains. That again will impact the ability to register on a device, because you can't register until the subscriber has reset it, and would again have to be updated once the subscriber resets their password. So
and it's usually fine, isn't it, Dave, for when you're testing and stuff like that. But in real deployment, you don't want someone to go in and if they make a change and reset their password, maybe through the end user web portal, they can't remember it, they hit reset, you don't want to take the phone out of service. So we highly recommend it's by user or site on the device passwords, not at none. Okay.
Correct. And again, one of the key messages there is if you are using devices that are not audio codes, Cisco, Polycom, or Yealink, we can set those devices up to use the device password. You just need to open a ticket, indicate the domains. Now, one thing to be careful with that is if you have some deployed right now and you want us to change those, if you've got subscribers that you've assigned a device password to, but you've got, let's say, a Grand Stream and they're logged in with their subscriber password, if that subscriber has a device password, if we make Grand Stream a PMC device, then those phones have to be updated, because the registration will then fail because it's got their subscriber password in the phone. It would now need the device password. So you just need to
So
be careful if you're switching, if you want us to switch your domain to do that, but we do recommend that because it makes it easier to manage, and especially
it's
if
more
you,
secure
it is
too.
more secure. And if you're managing the configuration of the phones using either our generic provisioning or your own provisioning where the user doesn't go in and do that, we highly recommend it because one, you're not providing the password to the subscriber, but you can use a site type password. You can use a password across all the phones that the subscribers don't know about, right? We don't recommend that for subscriber passwords. Each one should have a unique password. But for device passwords, since it's provider managed, you can use the same password across sites or SMBs, as an
Right.
example. Okay,
Great.
so some other things just um, to be mindful of is network related stuff. So um, we've got a network guide that everyone should have access to, but one of the big things that we find with registrations are firewall related issues. And in our debug tools on the portal, you have the ability to go in and pull down registration queries or traces from a phone trying to register. But what we see a lot of times is the whole SIP process, and we've got a, I think we've had one of these fireside chats on this that people should have access to. But when a phone registers, it sends a registration message to our call server. The call server responds with a 407 telling it to send its credentials, which is a combination of the username and password plus an algorithm that includes a timestamp. And then the phone will then send a new register with its credentials, and the call server will authenticate it. If you pull the registration down and you see a continuous register 407, register 407, register 407, a couple things to look at is there's a field in the register message called CSEQ, CSEQ. That has a number associated with it. So the first time a phone registers, it would say 1 register, the number 1. If the phone does not get the 407 response that we send, the phone will retransmit its register message, and it'll retransmit it like 5 or 6 times. So if you see that CSEQ not incrementing, it just is retransmitting 1 register, 1 register, 1 register, that means there's some type of firewall or network setting preventing the messages from getting back to the phone. If you see the way it would work if it gets to 407 is it would then send an updated register, and you would actually see the credentials in the register message and the number would increment. So the CSEQ would say 2 register. If you see a combination of registers in 407 where that CSEQ number is incrementing, that means it's a password or some type of setting in your configuration. Like for example, the username part for where it's got the username and password should not include the domain name in there. And if it does, it would fail in the registration process. So be mindful of how to look for network related issues. And the biggest factor to look for is whether or not a phone is retransmitting messages versus having wrong credentials in there. And we see that a lot with UDP. One way to get around that is to enable TCP for the devices. We do support TCP, but that using TCP versus UDP gets around a lot of network issues, specifically with ALG. ALG stands for Application Layer Gateway. And what ALG typically does is the firewall will dynamically change ports for things that are behind it. So if you check registrations and you see the port, the port associated with the IP address of messages coming from the phone, and that port is changing every minute or two, that's when you're in UDP, that's typically an indication that ALG is enabled on the network. And what happens there is the phone will register, but it's going to go through periods of time where messages like calls are sent to the phone, but the port has dynamically changed. So the firewall blocks it until the phone re-registers with a new port, and then there's a short period of time where messages could get through there until the firewall dynamically changes it again. So if you've got networks with ALG on and you can't disable it, using TCP will get around that. We also run into problems sometimes with NAT firewall timers. In general, our SVC is set to require re-registrations every 179 seconds. So if most phones will use an algorithm that would cause it to re-register about half that time or 2/3 of that time. I think Polycom would do it at about 120 seconds. If your NAT timer on your firewall is set to, I think it's more than that, no, if it's less than that, then your firewall could potentially block, shut down the pinhole, not allowing messages from the call server in. So you want your NAT timer to be greater than 179 seconds so that the re-registration, which keeps it open, can occur before the firewall starts shutting down the ports. Again, TCP gets around that as well, since it's a pretty much a nailed up connection. I think that pretty well covers it. You can use, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, you can also query registrations and get some details on this stuff too, right?
Right, you can go into the portal. You can see the device status in the portal. One word of warning with that: if you go to where you list all your subscribers, the status that's listed right there isn't necessarily real time. It's done as a snapshot. I don't remember how frequently that is updated, but if you go into an individual subscriber and look at the device status, that is a real-time status for the individual devices. So you might see something green against a subscriber when you do the full list, but if you nail down, or if you pull up a subscriber and the status recently changed for that device to offline or unregistered or something, it will show the value you see under the subscriber is a more real-time update versus what you see in the full list of subscribers. So again, that's just a snapshot that is updated every few minutes versus what you see on a subscriber.
Great. As always, Dave, you're a wealth of information. I learn every time I sit at your feet, kind of thing. Thank you, Dave. So don't forget that you can give subscribers in their end user web portal either just view access to what their phone is, or you can give them the ability, if you go into sites, then there is a field to allow end users to configure device keys, okay? And so if you do this, also whenever you assign that device, you'll see this little checkbox here, allow user to change. So they could just see it, but if you don't check this one here, they can't actually make changes to it. And when you do that, here's what it looks like. So they could, if they've got more than one device, you could pull down. They can change not only their buttons, kind of soft keys kind of deal, but they can also go over and add an expansion module, other things like that too. If they wanted to see an image of the phone, we do show that. But a couple of things, and I know, Holly, you had asked about this in some of the questions, but if you do allow an end user in the end user web portal, there are about 4 things that the admin can do that the end user cannot. And one is assign a line to that phone. They cannot go in and set a busy lamp field with call pickup, or a busy lamp field speed dial, or a directed call pickup, or a call park directed. It's easy for me to say. But you'll notice there's some things that they can do here. They could do speed dials, like do a *25 and create a call grabber number, and all of that. So yes, this does change the config file too. And when they're done, they have to hit check sync and it'll redo their phone on that. but those are some things. Now, I believe, Holly, you also asked another question about when we're in device parameters for keys on a user phone versus the user going in and making changes here. You know, they're both making changes to that config file. Some of the vendors allow the device parameters, config file parameters, and those are defined by the vendor themselves, do allow for things like changing a physical button. Like AudioCodes has a transfer button, and you can make that button with the config file be a supervised transfer or blind transfer kind of stuff. So depending upon the vendor, you can get into different pieces of that. It does vary by vendor. And then finally here, I wanted to show you there are several, and we'll open it up for some additional questions here at the end, about 5 minutes, is that don't forget, we have some really great documentation that the documentation team and Jason have gone through. My team has assisted a little bit, but they've done the bulk of this. They've created a document that is Kandy supported devices, right? And we update it every quarter, but they've created a device provisioning how-to guide, how to add a device to the portal. So that's very handy. And then don't forget, for all of these that are certified, that's an AudioCode, Cisco, Polycom, Yealink, in no particular order, alphabetical, is that there is a specific guide for each of them. And even in the appendix, there are some special things that you can turn on with the configuration files. Now, for those phones that are not certified but are supported, we do also have a SIP phone terminal configuration. And so that talks about the Sonome, the Grandstream, and some of the others that are supported. It shows you how to set those up. I do want you to also realize that in the training in the partner portal, we do have end user training for AudioCodes, Poly, Yealink. And if you haven't been on it already, if you go to kandy.io, at the top there is a training that has an end user training of generic stuff, including some video clips and stuff like that. But one thing that I do want to show you, and I'm just going to drag it over here, is the partner portal. If you haven't already registered for this, it is on our website. If you go to kandy.io, again, that training here at the top will take you to that landing page that has all of the different training of things. And the phones are in here as well. Polycom, Yealink, AudioCodes, will be adding in Cisco to this. But if you go to Ecosystem, Kandy Partner Portal, this is telling about our partner portal, instructions to register for it, and if you have any problems, you can get with us. And then, of course, you click this login here, and there you are. So what we've done, and what Jason was referring to, is in the support, we have created a knowledge base here and added in Polycom SIP phone device parameters to this, and you can download these. These are the configuration groups that have all the parameters of some of the stuff that we walked through, like enabling the security, the global address book, the quality of service monitoring, and some of that. And then similarly, we also have for the Yealink, and we'll upload for AudioCodes and for Cisco as well. But here's some of the Yealink ones. If you're interested in doing this, playing around with it in your lab, then these are great tools for you to use. And again, in the partner portal, if you go underneath support, we are going to be adding our cases and stuff in there eventually, but there's notifications and our knowledge base. So we've added several items in there, just FAQs and stuff like that for you to be able to utilize. All right, so let's go back. If there are any questions, Sharon, did any come up in addition that maybe we need to answer?
Nope, there are no new questions.
Okay. Well, if there are any, you can always email us, customersuccess@kandy.io. We're happy to help you through those. Don't forget that we do also have, if you go through to our events page, our upcoming events here, the next webinar will be September the 15th, we're going to take a deeper dive to look at our end user web portal. And then September the 21st, we have Kevin Hal Patterson is going to join us to talk about Kandy, what's in release 50, and give you some view into what's coming next. So do take a look at and register for our next events coming up. Thank you for your business. Thank you for your time today. And we appreciate you. And again, if you have any questions, please email us at customersuccess@kandy.io. Thank you for your time today.